The first F1 2026 test is one of the strangest we can remember, but it's already been surprisingly revealing. We've seen 8 teams on track so far, got a hint of some early problems, insight on what the new cars are like to drive, and more. So here's what we've learned already as we've started unpicking an unusually secretive test. Mercedes, Red Bull and Haas have shared the earliest wins between them. Pre-season favourite Mercedes beat everybody out of the pits on day 1 and had a very productive day in which both Kimi Antonelli and George Russell got to drive. They racked up more than 100 laps between them, a feat also achieved by Isaac Hadjar alone in the new RB22, which set the fastest time on Monday. Hadjar was clearly delighted with what he called a very good first day at Red Bull and admitted they were surprised to manage a lot more laps than we expected. But Haas had both teams beat on mileage as Esteban Ocon gave Ferrari's new engine a thorough run out by clocking up a whopping 154 laps. Lap times themselves mean very little in this test and next to nothing unless you know that a team drained the tank, rinsed the battery and still ended up 5 seconds off the pace. But it's all a useful reference for the rest of the week and gives a clue for who seemed comfortable at least starting to lean on their car a little more. There's no doubt these teams have started on the front foot in terms of good reliability and getting a good feel for their cars, 2 things every team wants from this test. If you were going to pick a few teams to encounter problems in the test, you might genuinely have guessed 3 that actually did. New engine manufacturer Audi suffered a technical issue after completing just 27 laps on Monday morning and didn't get out on track again for the rest of the day. Former most likely to be the crisis team Alpine is enjoying its start to life with a new, more reliable Mercedes engine, but it was a familiar sight when Alpine caused the first red flag of the test. At least the team got Franco Colapinto back out in the afternoon though. The other is Cadillac, F1's newest team, and unsurprisingly a long way adrift in pace and unfortunately behind already in achieving the mileage it wants. It was 6.5 seconds off the pace on day 1 and had a stuttering afternoon of running once Sergio Perez took over from Valtteri Bottas, with Perez admitting they had a lot of issues. Cadillac didn't run on day 2, which was always part of its plan, so it at least has some time to get ready for what will hopefully be a more productive next day on track, as this is the team that's treating this week the most like an extended shakedown. Mercedes, Audi, Alpine, Cadillac, Racing Bulls, Haas and Red Bull all leapt into action immediately on the opening day. As the test is spread out over 5 days and teams can run on 3 of them though, that early flurry on Monday made Tuesday a lot quieter. Here's John Noble from his favourite Barcelona hilltop to explain more.
So day 2 in Barcelona is going to be a bit quieter than the opening day of action. We already know, because of the rain that's supposed to be blowing in later on this afternoon, Mercedes, Audi, Alpine, Cadillac and Haas will not be running today. They want to save their running for a full day when it's dry. That should come later in the week. We've seen 2 cars out on track today. Charles Leclerc and the new Ferrari completed quite a long run first thing, so everything seems to be progressing well there. And Max Verstappen and the new Red Bull, bit of a stop-start day, off on his outlap, brought out a red flag very briefly, but has got back out on track, and I'm sure we'll see him later. What we don't know yet is if we'll see the Racing Bulls and the McLaren. Much will depend on the weather, their final decision, and of course no Aston Martin until Thursday at least, and there'll be no Williams this week. But that's our full list of the 11 teams testing.
An early testing priority for us when the rules change is learning how different the cars are on track. For 2026 there's a new style of power delivery and braking capacity due to the deployment and charging of the battery. Now there's an MG UK producing almost half of the engine's total power output. Plus the cars are slightly smaller, a decent chunk lighter and with narrower tyres. George Russell seems won over already. He reckons they're the quickest cars he's ever seen go past on the main straight at Barcelona and that you can feel the smaller dimensions and reduced weight when driving. Russell said it feels quite intuitive to drive once you wrap your head around it, while Perez called it massively different to what we've been used to. Liam Lawson admitted he's not fully on top of what the new cars demand yet, but is pleased that it feels like there's a lot more we can do as drivers to make a difference. And that's something Hadjar echoed when he said the cars are more predictable than their ground effect predecessors, so it's easier to play around with them, as well as giving the driver more engine options to tinker with. Day 1 of testing is far too early to make a firm judgment of how fast or slow the new cars are, but the initial showing has to be considered reasonably encouraging. Okay, Hadjar's best time was almost 7 seconds slower than Oscar Piastri's 2025 pole position lap, but that's a very unfair direct comparison. If you look at the last few big rule changes, it would be no surprise if these cars were at least a couple of seconds faster by the end of the week. Based on 2014, 2019 and 2022, across different rule changes, different circuits and conditions, new cars have been on average 2.4 seconds quicker at the end of the test than on day one. And the pole time for that year's race, where applicable, ends up being around 2.8 seconds faster than at the start of testing on average. At most though, those numbers can be as high as almost 4 seconds, and that's because of the cars and engines being pushed harder, conditions being better, and upgrades being developed. And as these 2026 cars and engines are still so immature, hitting a target of being only a couple of seconds slower than their predecessors looks achievable. While finding a good vantage point to watch the cars up close was basically impossible, there was still plenty to learn from places our colleagues John Noble and Ed Straw eventually got to see and hear them in action. Even from afar, it was noticeable how much the rear derating warning lights flash with the new generation of cars. The light comes on when cars are either harvesting energy or not running on full power, and acts as a warning to those behind about potential big closing speeds. In the past, the lights would only really be noticeable in certain sections of tracks, like the biggest braking zones, or during certain phases of a race. But the lights were on pretty much all the time here, through the high-speed turn 3, down the run from turn 5 to turn 7, and even up the hill to turn 9. It was a visible illustration of how energy-starved the 2026 engines are expected to be. One other notable aspect from early running 2 was how the sound of the cars isn't as alien as some perhaps feared. Yes, there are some differences in how they seem to be being downshifted, but stories about the need for the cars to be revved excessively in corners to keep the turbo spinning up so the battery doesn't need to be used to fill in for lag under acceleration prompted the idea of high revving, low gear weirdness in turns, and early impressions suggest things are not that extreme. And the overall sound is not night and day difference compared to the old engines, even if the removal of the MGUH has made them slightly louder. Our experience on the ground and what we've picked up from sources inside the paddock is just an initial flavour of both F1 2026 and also the kind of insight we're going to bring you in pre-season, with the first Bahrain test also set to be restricted to very little live broadcast coverage. So make us your paddock pass for the year by joining the Race Members Club, where we'll take you behind the scenes and bring you loads of exclusive extra content. Now is the perfect time to join, as we're running a 7-day free trial. Easily the most impressive thing about testing so far has been the mileage, as the first day for these new engines went significantly better than the last one. Back in 2014 at Jerez, when the 1.6 litre V6 turbo hybrids were introduced, a grand total of 93 laps was all that was logged, so 3 teams beat that on their own here. Several cars were ready to start racking up the miles as soon as the pit lane opened, and there were only 2 meaningful stoppages on the first day. It's something George Russell noticed as well. He took a question about how much confidence he takes from Mercedes' strong start and turned it into a comment about how impressed he was with several others. Russell name-checked what new engine manufacturer Red Bull had accomplished, and of course Haas with its Ferrari engine. He even mentioned its not quite 2014 vibes of half the grid breaking down and having issues. It also means the aggressive attempts to lock down access and information seem quite silly, given one of the main justifications was the fear some teams had about how bad this could be. One of the dominant storylines of this private test was the security presence clamping down on anywhere that offered even a glimpse of the circuit, and the fact some live timing became available on day 1 and was then quickly shut off. The security presence escalated to police getting involved and people being threatened with fines, which all seemed a little heavy-handed, especially as the secrecy seemed so unnecessary with how much content F1 and the teams ended up putting out and how well the cars ran. There was always going to be huge attention on this test, and it's unprecedented in the modern era to shut everyone else out, so this was avoidable. There was a better compromise, as a huge opportunity to educate and inform fans and bring people on a journey from now until the season opener turned a start to testing that should have been a huge success for F1 into something needlessly tense.